Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to our panel discussion or mini presentation that we're going to have now in the next 45 minutes or so. The topic of this panel is really all to do with the pandemic and working online, and we're really lucky to have 4 speakers to talk about how they adapted in their various teaching and training contexts. Welcome, James and Giovanni, who are talking about raining on prom night, the CELTA edition. Thank you very much.
Okay, welcome everyone. So thank you. Can you hear me okay? Can you just wave and yeah, good. I can see you nodding. Thanks. Okay, so this is our first slide. James and I started talking about this presentation, Raining on Prom Night, about a year before COVID. And we were just having a chat about all the things that can go wrong when you plan a lesson and when you're about to start teaching, and things that might happen, and how, of course, annoying or challenging they might be for teachers. So we started talking about giving a presentation on how you can make the most of these accidents or incidents in our teachers' lives. However, then COVID happened and our idea took a completely different turn, because obviously we had to deal with a mega challenge, and something that, of course, was that we, something we hadn't prepared for. And we started, so of course, the metaphor of prom night, of course, in the American culture, but now, of course, in most English-speaking countries, is a night that is an opportunity for young people to come together, and the build-up is massive. Obviously, the same can be said for some lessons and for teachers when they're preparing for their classes. And of course, we wanted to explore the possibilities that are that come with the rain on someone's prom night. And I remember, for example, talking to a trainee right before COVID, someone who just finished an in-person course, and of course they were thrown into a virtual learning environment. So quite a downpour for their prom night.
Mm-hmm. So we don't know who these 2 gentlemen are, but they look young and handsome. But so yes, prom night and teaching. Metaphors are important when we're communicating ideas, and this metaphor is a very powerful one for us. It's raining on prom night. What do you do when it rains? What do you do when things don't go as expected? How flexible can you be? What resources do you have to draw on? The first time that we gave this talk was in June 2020 for International House World. And that was kind of the start of the downpour. We talked about personal, didactic, technical modifications that had to be made in order for us to keep working and to continue to train teachers during lockdowns worldwide. And what we are hoping is that as of now, November 2021, all of these basic fundamental changes have been made. The problems have been solved, and we can actually start to look forward to how we move forward as an industry. So we are actually saying that there isn't any going back. It's all forward motion from here, and we'd like to discuss a few key concepts that we think are important as we move forward together.
So the first concept that we're going to be dealing with is this: face-to-face or mask-to-mask. Now, when we're in the middle of a storm, of course, our first, I think, tendency is to look for a bucket for rainwater dripping from the ceiling. However, if there aren't just a few drops coming through the ceiling, but a lot of water, buckets of water, literally, I think, of course, then the strategy needs to be a different one. So we thought, we have been thinking a lot about this phrase, face-to-face, and the definition, which is really, this contrast that is often brought about in articles or discourse in ELT at the moment about, online versus face-to-face. And face-to-face at the moment really is I don't know where in which country this is possible. It's certainly not in ours. Face-to-face in our context doesn't exist at the moment. It's mask to mask. Obviously, you know, I've had the opportunity to observe a lot of in-person lessons, which I think is a better definition from face-to-face, because I think Zoom is more face-to-face at the moment, and than physical classroom contexts are in Italy for sure. And I've observed a lot of, you know, face-to-face classes, some restrictions and the conditions of the classes make them really far from ideal. So lots of questions have been raised about the opportunity of training teachers online when they then have to teach in a physical classroom. But I'd like to analyze, of course, also the challenges of training teachers on a CELTA course that is in person in a physical classroom when it's maybe, you know, their first time teaching and they are dealing with COVID restrictions. So they're wearing a mask, the students can't see their face, which of course research shows is a big part of, you know, phonology acquisition, and they can't move from their chairs, they can't monitor. So a lot of challenges that are added to their first time teaching. And this is why we're hoping that we are going to start seeing online training and learning as a feature, not a bug, not a virus. Obviously, CELTA, one of the things that, for example, I've observed during these face-to-face classes that I was mentioning is that teachers have reverted back to habits that they had before the pandemic, which really, show that, there's this kind of contrast between the two environments, which doesn't need to be there. For example, in some of these in-person classes, there was an excessive use of paper for pictures when, really, at least in our context, for students have smartphones, students have tablets that we give them, at school. So of course, those could have been used very easily instead of paper. The dynamic of breakout rooms has been one of the most fascinating for me to observe during, a year and a half of online CELTAs at IHRome. And I think, this could be replicated in the school, and I'd like to see a lot more, for example, experimentation with using different environments with different physical environments within the same school, because I think the kind of privacy that the breakout room gives you is really conducive to learning. Or instead of using mini boards to show your answers, if you are having to comply with COVID restrictions, you can use, again, tablets and smart boards.
Yes, so as Giovanni said, it's we should try to stop ourselves. We recommend that we should try to stop ourselves thinking that it was all rosy before this pandemic. In many ways, what we've seen and done in the last year and a half has served as an accelerator to the integration of technology and education that was already happening before the pandemic. I read a fact the other day that in 2019, remember 2019 was 1 BC, one before coronavirus. In 2019, global edtech investors spent $18 billion on investment. Education technology was already a huge business worldwide. And of course, now our practices have been transformed almost overnight for most of us, but the wheels were already in motion. So the idea of going back to normal is really not conducive to any positive change. Normal wasn't everything that it could have been. And so we would like to take this as a positive time to recalibrate and reconceptualize what we're doing and how we're doing it. So we don't know when. This slide was rather optimistic. We made this a week or two ago, and unfortunately things in Italy have nosedived a little since then, and across Northern Europe, because winter is coming. Winter is coming. So we'll see when this will happen, but it will happen one day. That we'll have the choice between a physical space and an online space in which to train and in which to teach. And we would like all of our options, all of our skills to be on the table to provide the best possible services for the teachers that we work with. And then down the line, the best possible services for the students that we work with. So what are we recommending when the storm does finally pass? One day in the future. Flexibility. So there are many great things about the physical classroom. There are many great things about the online classroom. How can we be flexible? How can we combine and integrate these to, as I said, provide the best service to the people that we're working with? And then another thing that we have discussed a lot is the level of collaboration between centres around the world has been really quite incredible in the last year and a half. And we would like people to continue to share ideas, to share innovations. And in this way, we can keep moving forward. It's really a great opportunity to adapt, to refocus, to modernize what we do as an industry of teacher trainers.
Yes, and one of the key concepts moving forward is definitely assessment. We chose this image because it shows how a particle can be, the position of a particle can or can't be measured. And one of the principles in physics that I've always been fascinated with is the principle of uncertainty by Heisenberg, which roughly states that basically you can't really know where and how fast a particle is at the same time. So the more you know about one variable, the less you know about the other. And I find that this principle is fascinating because one of the things that we had to do right away when we moved to online CELTA was, of course, talk about criteria and how these needed to be changed for online assessment. And this was very much needed. I'm not, of course, questioning this. I was, part of it and, trying to adapt them. But perhaps, of course, now, once the emergency passed, what we need to do now is to reflect on, the principle of uncertainty, that in a way means that beauty's in the eye of the beholder. And you need a scientific approach to analyzing how criteria need to be adapted or just recreated from scratch in some areas because of a new environment. And I think of a new or just diverse environment. And I think that one of the things that's it's become obvious to me after months of online CELTAs is that become more and more aware of how research and scientific research into certain criteria is needed to avoid, again, this idea that we are going with our own bias towards assessment. And obviously those who are extremely in favor of online instruction will only see certain things, and those who are extremely against online instruction and pro in-person instruction will notice the difficulties. And this is a lot of the discourse that I've heard, whereas I think we need to take a very, like I said, a punctual and precise approach.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting actually. It's a false dichotomy, isn't it? Are you more a physical or online person? Well, both. It's not the question that we should be asking. It's about how we can combine both in order to create the best possible courses that we can. So Giovanni mentioned scientific approach. I'd also add a humanistic approach, holistic approach that we can start to define again together as an industry. It doesn't come from one person, it comes from collaboration between professionals around the world. Cognitive flexibility is an extremely important skill that I think we've all shown as teacher trainers in the last year and a half. And it's an important skill in teaching. So I think it's really important to set a good example to the people that we work with. And I think that's something that we can continue as a kind of foundational principle as we go forward here.
Mm-hmm. And we just like to finish off with this last slide on hybrid, because hybrid learning has been definitely a big challenge for a lot of teachers and academic managers around the world. And I think we now have there's a suggestion coming from Cambridge of mixed mode CELTAs, so giving trainees the opportunity to be trained in a physical as well as online learning environment. And I think this gives the word hybrid a new meaning and a new shine, perhaps, because it is a kind of hybrid course. Obviously, again, we think we're looking forward to running, a course very, very soon. But obviously, again, we think we need and hope we can all approach as a community this opportunity with again, a scientific mind, answering some questions that need to be answered. For example, how assessment is going to be recalibrated and on the basis of, trainees teaching 4 lessons in person and 4 lessons online. So their 5th lesson is going to be really their 5th lesson, but their first in a new environment. So lots of things to take into consideration, and we're just, our time is up. So we're going to leave the floor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, for sort of like illustrating perhaps the brave new world that we might be going into. Okay, welcome, Joanna.
Hi.
Yes, Joanna's going to be talking to us today about learning by doing, replanning a methodology course to prepare for online teaching. Over to you, Joanna.
Thank you. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you. I hope everybody can see me and hear me. I'll just start sharing, and I hope you can see it as well. As Abir actually is going to come after me, and she's from a university context. I'm also actually from a university context right now, although I do teach in language schools as well. But right now I'm going to talk about a university course that I had to replan. And that's my background, basically, that I teach at a Hungarian university in Budapest. And there we teach pre-service and in-service teacher trainees. The pre-service trainees are basically young, so they are 20-something-year-old students. They haven't started their teaching practice yet. They are just starting out. So when I was teaching them this course that I'm going to talk about in a second, they were about to start their teacher training, so their short-term practice. And the in-service trainees, they are usually older students than 20-something. They already teach in state schools in Hungary. But for some reason, they attend a teacher training course. Maybe they teach music, but now they want to teach English, or they teach at a lower level and they would like to teach higher level, like high school students. And the course was actually using ICT tools in the ELT classroom. And I'd like to highlight that bit, the ELT classroom, because originally this course was designed for face-to-face, or as in the old times, face-to-face, so not mask-to-mask, face-to-face teaching, and how we can support that kind of teaching with ICT tools. Now, COVID came, and actually when this course happened, everything was already new and different, and all classes were held synchronously online. So we use Zoom to teach. No classroom practice at all. So we were online, even though in-service trainees were still teaching in their state schools face-to-face. They were slowly transitioning into online teaching. However, the pre-service young trainees, they had to start their short-term practice online. So actually their first impression and experience of teaching was online teaching. So as James and Giovanni said before, they are now in the opposite case, that they will have to meet real flash people for the first time. So they actually now have online teaching practice, but no real world teaching practice. And why did I think of this whole idea of redesigning the course completely? Because I realized that these two groups have changing needs, and I wanted to give a quick response to their new expectations and requests. Okay, and I wanted to really provide efficient support to these struggling teachers and teacher trainees who had minimal online teaching experience. So they were the in-service teacher trainees. They had to do this as they were studying how to do it. So I had to be very, very quick. And the pre-service ones also needed this help because they started their teaching practice online. So I thought this is the best moment, actually. They were in the best possible position that they are having this course where I could equip them with all the knowledge that they needed to do their work efficiently. So I also had this belief in learning by doing and in the power of passing knowledge on. So I also thought that, okay, I'm now teaching these two groups, but they can transfer the knowledge. Especially I was thinking about the in-service trainees who could teach their colleagues what they learn in this course at university. They have the advantage of studying this course, and then they can pass this knowledge on to their colleagues, and then hopefully everyone can teach much better online. And I can spread this knowledge through this waterfall of other people. And how this happened. So I just want to give you this very quick icon-based little recipe of designing this learning by doing course. What I did first, I tried to identify their needs, obviously, what they need, what they have to do. That's also the second step, what they have to do and how they have to do it. So I interviewed them, surveyed them, what kind of environments they are in. Are they using Microsoft, Google? What kind of software they have access to? I really wanted to find out how I can support them in this. So I really tried to focus on what they are required to use or what they were required to use at that point. And then I raised everything from the old course schedule to fit their needs at that moment. And then I identified the main points, which were basically exploiting and using all the functions of video chatting software. We focused on not only Zoom, but Microsoft Teams as well, because a lot of in-service teachers were using Microsoft Teams. So functions, we heard lots of ideas for giving feedback in the previous talks. So everything that video chat software can give teachers that they can exploit. Then I also focused on interactive task design. So you probably know all these websites already, like WordWall, learning apps, but what they are and how we can use them. And collaboration online. So we heard, again, lots of solutions for using Google Docs, Padlet, blogs, websites, podcasting software. So anything that can boost collaboration online. And like James and Giovanni were using lots of metaphors in their presentation. I'm using one here. So these flip-flops would like to represent flipped teaching. And I used formative assessment in this learning by doing setup. And I just want to tell you how, like, the main bits that were changed. So originally there were 12 sessions. They included micro-teaching opportunities. So with our teacher trainees, we could have micro-teaching in class. We could test it, see it, give feedback. So proper teaching practice. It also contained project work in the classroom with the help of ICT, using interactive whiteboards, and autonomous and flipped learning came at a very late point, because at that time, like 1 BC, so 2019, 2018, flipped wasn't so important in those times. But then the redesign sessions, I have to mention that the change in the number of sessions wasn't actually my decision. As luck has it, actually the sessions were cut in half. So like the number was cut. So I had to plan 6 sessions instead of 12, but we couldn't really do any micro teaching. So micro teaching sessions fell out. Instead, I focused on Zoom training and virtual learning environment training at first. So that was the very, very first lesson. Let's learn all the functions. Let's familiarize ourselves. Learner training, which can be also good when you start teaching online. Learner training is essential. And our chosen virtual learning environment was Google Classroom. So they had training in that. And this was the first, because we needed to build on their knowledge. And then autonomous and flipped learning came right after that. So that was the second session, because the whole idea was that they learn autonomously and they get flipped materials to speed up the process, because I had to operate with fewer sessions. So I tried to make up for it with lots of flipped materials. And I also included asynchronous learning, again, because we had to do a lot of asynchronous learning to make up for the lost 6 sessions. Also because they might want to do, or they might have wanted to do that with their own students. And how? There were, like, as you might remember, there were 2 main pillars: flipped learning. So they always got maximum 5-minute long methodology videos with tasks on a website called Nearpod. I really, really like Nearpod. And I use it still for my hybrid async sync lessons. I think it's a very, very good website for creating flipped materials, because you can have lots of tasks that are diverse, and it can include lots of different interaction with the online material. And these flipped mini lessons always had open-ended questions at the end, which served as revision questions at the beginning of these sync sessions. And then I also included formative assessment, because it was important. I wanted them to get to know formative assessment, flip videos, point system, peer feedback, and they had the option to resubmit their improved tasks, just to be like, it wasn't, the point wasn't assessment as in like you're wrong or you did something wrong, but to develop and improve. And tasks were always in sync with the material. If we learn about virtual learning environment, create a Google Classroom and show it to me. If we learn about flipped teaching, watch a flipped lesson, then create one yourself on Nearpod or any other website. If we play a game on WordWall, do one yourself and submit it. So they were always in sync, and I wanted them to experience and do the same thing at the same time, and then they could move it into their own lessons. And that was the idea there. And this was my very, very quick step-by-step approach to redesigning this course. And actually, the course is going to come in the coming term. So in the spring term, I will have to redesign it again, because as the others already mentioned, we have hybrid, we have different teacher roles, we have all kinds of different setups. So actually it has to be redesigned again.
Thank you so much, Joanna. Goodness, I was listening to that thinking, I needed that. I definitely needed that 2 years ago. Maybe I need to call.
They were lucky.
Yeah, no, exactly. And it's my pleasure now to reintroduce you Avir, whose talk is called A Journey Through Time. Enjoy.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Melissa. And thank you, Joanna. I think most of what Joanna said, we had to go through it in university context. So I currently work with IH Cairo, but I also do a consultation with Forest University. And this is when I spent since 2013 until now, and specifically during the pandemic time. So Forest University is the only university in Alexandria. It has around 14,000 students, undergraduates with 12 different faculties. It has a couple of dual degrees and some postgraduate programs. The English Language Center, which I am the director of studies, we have around 3,500 students who register every semester. And when the pandemic started in March 2020, students stayed at home on the 16th, and we stayed home on the 19th. And this is when everything went in a different direction. So different people reacted to the pandemic differently. So I've used these pictures before in different presentations, and I thought I would just put them in all in one slide. Is what were the challenges that we faced at Forest University at that time. So basically, students were lost in the digital world. We couldn't find them when they stayed home in March 16th. Most of them didn't have their emails ready, so we could contact them. We didn't have their phone numbers. And I guess this is a picture which can tell a lot about how students felt at that moment. Our teachers were burnt out, working round the clock like everyone else, not ready for technology. They weren't tech experts. We did not have at Forest University a history of online learning. So this was our first encounter with online learning. We had issues of connectivity, so poor connection, and some students did not have proper smartphone devices or proper devices where they can connect. Very poor connection, especially in the areas where they were. Everyone was not feeling okay about it. And this also is could represent a teacher, could represent us as management. We were everywhere and trying to save the situation as much as we could. At that time, we had 114 Google Classroom created on the spot for our students, but not all students could join the Google Classroom at that moment. Now, since this is a journey through time for our teachers, so the focus is on teachers mainly, not on students today. So basically, teachers were anxious. They didn't know what to do. They had family obligations. They weren't tech experts. And I guess most of our teachers were in this picture. They didn't know how to prepare for lessons online. They couldn't write on screen, and that's why we couldn't implement Zoom at the beginning. There were loads and loads of resources coming through the internet with all free resources, what's crazy flow of resources. As I said, they couldn't manage Zoom. Students were using different devices. They couldn't open their maneuver between tabs. So this is how our teachers were during the pandemic. Now, these are the same teachers who all of them have taken induction program, a teacher training induction program, or a teaching training program before the pandemic. Everyone, before they start teaching at the university in the English Language Center, they have to go through a training program, even if they are experienced teachers. So basically, they take some theoretical background, they do some lesson planning work, could be workshops or input sessions. They do teach in front of each other, and we give them some feedback. And then after they are done with the program, they do some peer observation and then formal observation to their colleagues. But when the pandemic started, the pandemic attack, it was time to stop and revisit our training program. We couldn't rely on what these teachers have taken, because whatever they had taken before wouldn't help during the pandemic. So I think some of the pandemic facts were, it has affected everyone dramatically. Blended learning is not going anywhere. So it was time to wake up and revisit the system. But at the same time, we needed to take it slowly and to appreciate what everyone is trying to do and to redesign, like Joanna said, redesign, and now we have to redesign again. So keep on redesigning the programs to fit the current situation. And I think the pandemic was more of a catalyst because we had to rebuild our training program, which is a focus of this presentation. So what did we do? We had to go with a bottom-up approach. We had to go, we felt it's better to rely on everyone has to take part in this. We didn't say everyone has to take part in this. We encouraged teachers to take part in the training program. As we stayed home, as management, I started realizing that there were some teachers who were actually tech experts, and some teachers had very good idea on how to train other teachers. And this was a support system we relied on, is let's involve everyone in the training. And teachers were in control. They started participating and they started suggesting sessions. They started researching and taking part in this. And I think the reason behind this was the tough times we were in and the sudden changes that we had to go through. And teachers, they were responded better to colleague-generated training. They were more collaborating and communicating when it came to knowledge sharing. And they felt it's okay to have a younger teacher giving training to a senior one. So they were open to this, and we started creating smaller groups to be responsible for the bigger goal. We went through 4 stages. These stages are going to be changing or phases. They are going to be changes as we go along. But this is how we went along with it. We started with meeting online and chatting via WhatsApp. We had Flock. We tried to understand as much as we could what the teachers need and what kind of teaching context we were dealing with, because now we had to teach. We had to use Google Classroom. We couldn't use Zoom at the beginning. So all our content was moved to Google Classroom. So we needed to see how we could train our teachers to do so. So we did a lot of communication backward and forward between the teachers and the training team. We gave ownership to our teachers, the smaller teams, as I said. So one team was responsible for Google Classroom and another was responsible for Padlet. A group was responsible for collecting ideas and tools for the training sessions they were responsible to do. This gave leadership and responsibility, and the teachers became agents. So this is what we're trying to do, is we're trying to have our students responsible for their own learning, where actually what we did is we helped the teachers to be responsible for their own learning and training to other teachers. And we did a lot of surveys just to vote and to see how things are going and to see if other teachers were whether they were responding to this kind of training or not. And we helped a lot of voicing to their opinion, so that we would know, instead of forcing a particular training on them, we tried as much as we can to hear them out. And finally, we did a lot of interaction and a training where there were a lot of people attended on different times. We tried to find what's most important to be trained on, what kind of availability the teachers had. And there were more reward to the teachers, and the management was only facilitating this kind of training. So basically, this is how the teacher training system changed during the pandemic. I'm not sure now that we're back to face-to-face, are we going to go on with the same approach or not? But I think we're going to be doing this because I have seen a lot of self-initiation and confidence from the teachers. I have seen a lot of interaction between teachers and giving feedback on what the teachers have done. And the teachers are really proud by the sessions they have given. And we have had a group of good sessions. I'm sorry, we're running out of time. Sorry. Okay, so basically, what did we learn out of this, or what kind of tips have we gained? So we all had one common goal, is to train each other. we had better communication with each other because we could communicate and get to know what we need. It helped in the continuous development of the teachers. So teachers were going into the right direction. And when we started in March with only Google Classroom, in June, we could go on Zoom and deliver our lessons on Zoom. And finally, we had improved morale because everyone felt they were part of the system. I just wanted to finish up by showing how the Padlet worked when it comes to teacher training. So I'm going to stop for a second and go to my Padlet. I just want to, it's just an example of how the Padlet helped. So everyone had the chance to post. And what's interesting is people had the chance to comment on each other and interact and maybe vote or rate on the tool or the idea posted by other colleagues. So this was a good way to get people to communicate together without having the management to impose a particular training or showing people that they were low on a particular teaching technique. So it gave us a chance to help each other, communicate and train each other. And this was our journey up till the moment now that we're back to face-to-face. We'll see how it goes. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Avir, for taking us through how you went about training your in-service teachers, which is an incredible job. I think everyone can relate to the feelings of those teachers. And probably everyone could have wished that they had maybe managers, training development managers like you. Let's all just take a minute then to have a think, maybe put a couple of questions in the chat, then we'll have a very quick general Q&A and bring the others back. Okay, brilliant. So thank you once again to all of our panelists. I've just collected one or two questions. Okay, so this one came up in Giovanni and James's talk, Raining on Prom Night. Which criteria would you like to see changed for a more mixed, multimodal kind of CELTA course?
Well, I think, there's a number of criteria that need to be maybe not necessarily changed, but definitely observed and researched. First of all, the ones to do with obviously the use of resources, which I think, needs to be interpreted differently in different learning environments. Definitely the ones to do with skills. I think they're generally speaking quite vague, and whereas there's a lot of attention in general. I mean, even before COVID, there's a lot of focus on language and on systems, in the criteria, and a lot less on skills. So I think that's something that could be researched, especially now that we have the opportunity to do that in two different environments. And skills learning is really interesting online. I mean, anyone who's been teaching online, I think, has had the opportunity to observe how quickly, for example, listening skills are acquired compared to the physical classroom. So, or there's certain things that are very, very different. So it's fascinating, So I mean, I think criteria can be researched, but
definitely. Also, 5A is completely redundant now. Arranging the classroom appropriately for teaching and learning. Unless your bed is in a ridiculous state behind you, then I think we can cross that one out.
True. I mean, talking more generally, I suppose, thinking, Joanna and Avir, your teachers and the way you might evaluate your teachers. Are there any differences in the way you might evaluate your teachers, say, if you were observing them in an online class as opposed to a face-to-face class? Perhaps, Joanna, you could comment on that.
I actually in another course we had online micro teaching sessions, so that was something interesting to observe and give feedback on. And what I noticed, or what I looked at most of the time, is how they used interaction patterns in online teaching. So pair work, group work, but because on Zoom, pair work is different. So breakout rooms are different. So if they overuse these things, it's actually not such a good idea. How do they use open class discussions? So basically, I think that was more interesting in online lessons.
Yeah. And
I'm sorry. Yeah, I usually don't put too much pressure on using tools like tech tools. So as long as they could get their aims achieved and their interaction patterns varied, and with a space for the students to speak, for their production, I usually don't put too much into it, especially if they don't know the tools.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, we've got to be realistic, haven't we?
Yeah.
Okay. There's a couple of questions grouped up here, actually, Joanna, for you that came from your talk, but they're all covering the same thing. If you just have a quick look at them. So,
right, yeah.
Did you find that you completed all the asynchronous material? I think that's a big worry when anyone does asynchronous work.
Yeah, I saw this question in the chat actually, and some, I think Duncan just asked about Nearpod just now. Nearpod is my answer, because I could monitor what's happening. So basically, Nearpod has this option to give out these asynchronous flipped tasks, and I can always check who has done the task so far, what they answered, and then actually on Nearpod you cannot give direct comments, but I can send them an email that, well, I haven't seen you done anything yet, but basically Nearpod is very good for monitoring. Google Classroom, again, I can see when they submitted something. Google Documents, I can comment. So I kept checking things. It does require some time. You don't have to check it every single day, maybe just check it twice a week.
Right. And I don't know whether Giovanni and James, you were doing asynchronous work, whether you found had these similar worries at all, or any suggestions? If not, no, fine. No, not for you. And Abir?
We've used Google Classroom more than Nearpods, so yeah.
Okay. There was one other question, I think a question that came up for yours, Joanna, which was, did you use any form of self-assessment as opposed to formative assessment?
Very good question. I think actually self-assessment is sort of part of formative, because it's you're still like self-assessment, peer assessment. It's all part of this ongoing journey of assessment that is formative. We did use some, although not on this course. So in the other course, which was at the same time online, which contained these micro-teaching sessions, what I did, and maybe the CELTA trainers use something similar, or maybe they could use this setup. What we did is that they had their micro-teaching, then I sent everyone in breakout rooms. They could discuss what they thought of that teaching session while I kept the one who taught in the main room, and we did some discussion. So the self-assessment was there and then we came back together into the main room and discussed. Actually, the ones in the breakout rooms were collecting their ideas on Jamboard, and then we could look at that together.
Yeah.
So in that sense, self-assessment was used.
Yeah. Okay, lovely. Let's just, there was one question, Abir, that struck me as I was watching your talk. And it was just, one thing that came across really clearly was, the bottom-up processes that you used, so that, and the enthusiasm on the parts of the teachers, because everyone was in the same boat, everybody wanted to be able to do this job in that sort of crisis moment. And you were able to harness that really well. But I did wonder how possible do you think it will be to maintain these levels of motivation in terms of continuous professional development without the crisis in place?
Donc, yow li nga kii woon da ngay yegg si ba fii quoi.
Someone's mic is on. It's okay. Yes, I think it's going to take some, like when you mentioned between our presentations, like this minute to process everything. So now that we're back to face, and like Joanna said, our classes are split into two. So instead of teaching, for example, 3 classes, you have to teach 6 because we've divided the students. So now we've got new challenges going on, and teachers are coming back and trying to see how they can get back to face when it was something that used to do as part, it was the norm before. Now it's kind of, okay, we used to do things, now we're doing it differently. But I think having this approach or continuing on doing this approach is going to be very helpful when teachers start to get demotivated by having to come to work every day now and having to teach extra load when it's the original load, but because we've divided the students into smaller groups. So I think we're going to continue the same approach, but maybe give them some time to process the whole returning back to work.
Could I add something, Melissa?
Sure, of course.
On the point of motivation and hybrid in general. I don't know about where you plural yous are teaching, but a lot of places in Italy are doing what they call hybrid, but it's some of the students are online and other students are in the physical space at the same time. We touched on this very, very briefly in the presentation, but I think it's worth underlining. This is not beneficial for anybody because your attention can only go in one place at each time. The people online don't get the full benefit. The people in the physical space don't get the full benefit. So I really think that's something that we can look at. A lot of teachers are having a terrible time because of it, and it's no wonder. It's a problem of the human being. Also, a great thing about a human being, the attention only goes in one place, so you can't have this dual thing simultaneously.
Yes. I mean, I've only had the experience of it the one time when I did a teacher development session, and it was really dividing of your attention and quite tricky to know, what to do.
I would like to know how. I mean, I would like to know how it does work. If it does work well for anybody, I want to know, because a lot of teachers are asking me, and I have no clue.
Yeah. Oh, well, Julie in the chat says she thinks it depends on the setup.
So what's the good setup?
Oh, Julie, can you switch your camera on?
My camera's on, my mic wasn't. No, I do agree with what James has said, because I've seen so many hybrid setups where people have just literally added people at the front on their Google Meet or whatever they're using. And I don't think that's fair. I think it's not fair to the students who are being beamed up at the front of the class. So in our school, what we've done is we've set up TV screens at the back of the class in a place where a student would normally be, and a spare computer so we can get them to work with other people in groups, in pairs. And the teacher at the front sees the class, including the people on the big screen who are sitting in the area where the students would normally be. I think it feels more as if everybody is present. I think it really has to be thought through carefully, but I do think it's possible.
Yeah.
That's a great idea. We could have like holograms as well. That would be even better. Hologram, they want to see.
Augmented reality. No, I think it's really interesting. I think what's important with all the learning. I mean, I'm not a fan of nevers and always, and I just think it's really interesting. Yes. Yeah, although I am married, yes. But yes, no, I think it's really interesting to research, all these, new techniques or strategies that we're coming up with. And like I said, I mean, I have a very maybe scientific approach to life in general, and to ELT as well. And I think it would be really important to really just analyze how things could work out. And hybrid is definitely the newest thing. I mean, online tuition was there well before COVID.
Yes. It's the new frontier, isn't it? Joanna, did you want to say something?
Sorry, I just saw, I think IH shared this the other day, and I heard, or I saw IH Manchester, mentioned in the chat, they posted something on virtual reality in the hybrid classroom. Now that is, I'm super interested in what could happen. And as Giovanni said, augmented reality and all that, yes, we're going to have holograms very soon.
it's the next level, isn't it? I might have to retire. But thank you so much. And can everyone please thank our panelists for contributing.